and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I'm known on this level of the tower as Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you join me here for a bit of palaver on Hail to Stephen King. That's right, yes, last weekend I was getting over a little bit of an illness, and we ended up throwing up a review of Full Throttle, that's right, which is an awesome collection by none other than Cy King's son, Joe Hill. It's one of the best reads that I did in the entirety of this year. So many terrific stories, including two that he co-wrote with his father that had been previously released but have been finally properly collected, that being Throttle, it's a Richard Matheson kind of inspired story that was in a collection called He is Legend, but it's still really very much its own thing, despite just, drawing inspiration from Duel. And then In the Tall Grass, which is still one of the most disturbing short stories that I have ever read, recently adapted actually into a film that you can watch on Netflix right now. So take that into consideration, but I am going to pose a question here today because it's been rather heavy on my heart. So we are rounding out the year of 19. The year of 19, probably, even more so than 2 years ago in 2017, biggest Stephen King year ever as far as adaptations go and prominence and just more things being announced and, additional remakes, additional projects. Just this past week, we were told that they're working on a Jerusalem's Lot television series for Epix, which is going to have Adrian Brody. And Jerusalem's Lot is one of my favorite shorts, not just from Night Shift, but the entirety of everything that, King has ever written. It's disturbing, it's gruesome, and I'm assuming this is kind of a springboard sort of thing after everything that went down in Castle Rock Season 2 that I have almost finished watching. I was waiting until every single episode was up so that I could properly binge it, about halfway through as of this point. But Lizzie Kaplan, she is a standout, she's tremendous. The rest of the cast, Tim Robbins, it's great. So look forward to a review of that along with, Marshall Parker, Cecil Laird. All of us are doing that, not as a Hail to Stephen King episode, so just, look out and be ready because it's coming very soon. But yeah, so that announcement, they also announced that apparently FX is working on another adaptation of Carrie, although this time it would have a different spin on it, and in my estimation, for the bullying aspect, a much more vicious one with either a different race other than a white girl, so they could go, Black, Asian, something of that nature, Hispanic, or which would be perhaps, maybe double down and do both, but the other phrase and, just very different aspect would be maybe a transgender, so different sort of vicious picking on and bullying and just, just hatefulness in that regard. So, while I don't feel like we need another Carrie, because we've already had the initial film, which was tremendous. Brian De Palma's is untouchable in my estimation, although I do think The Rage, Carrie 2, is underrated. It's been reviewed here on the channel. Then there was also a television series that was worked on at one particular point. It was more a mini-series that was a backdoor pilot for a film, for an ongoing. That didn't end up having enough success as they were, hoping, and so that was another thing. And then we still had the Chloe Grace Moretz, just 10 years ago. So I don't know. Do we need another Carrie? It's debatable. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that has the Stephen Kingaissance concluded? That's the phrase that has just resonated with me after the way this year panned out. And so yes, we did have that second season of Castle Rock. Yes, we did have the third and presumed final season of Mr. Mercedes, because there's not as much that they can really do with that story at this particular point, having covered all three of the books. But, I don't know. We also had Dr. Sleep that underperformed drastically. We also had It Chapter 2 that, while not quite, I don't know, the numbers were fantastic for it, but not as good as the previous one 2 years before. And definitely, I would imagine, not what the studio was hoping for as far as just like gangbuster, just crushing it numbers, which the film still did to a degree, but just not as much. And the failure of Dr. Sleep was really, in my estimation, more so the fact that Warner Brothers released both of those films, and so they were like, okay, we've only got like a month or so, a month and a half, nearly 2 months to like really properly put Dr. Sleep in people's mindsets and stuff. And so perhaps if they had actually released it closer to Halloween, things would have been different. But yeah, so the point being there that Dr. Sleep massively underperformed. It Chapter 2 didn't quite crush the way that they were hoping. And so the Kingaissance kind of concluding, or at least like scaling back a little bit, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. I mean, Psy-King was ours still in the 90s when, especially the late 90s and early 2000s, when the adaptations weren't quite as quality, I suppose, but the writing was still great. So yeah, despite the abundance of projects that are still being developed, and most of them having been announced in these last 2 years since this Kingaissance actually occurred, I don't necessarily feel it as a negative thing if the general public's interest is waning. I mean, there is still so much that is coming at us between that. I mean, in January, in just a couple of weeks on HBO, we have The Outsider, which looks fantastic. Ben Mendelsohn, Jason Bateman, I cannot wait for that. Even if the book is not like in the highest regard for me as far as stuff that Psy-King did in this past decade, it still looks like it's going to be of just an elevated essence, and they're coming off very hot from Watchmen right now, and I don't know, that's something that I can't wait for. I'm very curious how Josh Boone's reinterpretation of The Stand is going to do. That's on CBS All Access. And then, I mean, we could just seriously run down the list of all of the different things that they are reinterpreting, reworking on. Firestarter is one. Oh boy, still aren't seeing Christine or anything like that, but Tommy Knockers, another one, James Wan, he's giving his efforts to that. Still No Needful Things reimagining, although that would be absolutely badass. Insomnia still not being in the pipeline, unfortunately. Bag of Bones, let's not even talk about that. But Johannes Roberts at one point was attached to do another version of Hearts in Atlantis, but one that focused specifically on the second story, Hearts, where the kids actually get addicted to playing, Hearts, the card game. So that's another thing. The Talisman, which is, ironically, our book of the month, Amblin Entertainment is still supposedly working on that. But there's so many projects that have been announced, and yet we don't necessarily know the specifics of the timeline. It's just that they've been announced. Things are being worked on, stuff like The Long Walk, stuff like Mile 81 about the evil car, which is a story I think is actually better than Christine in a lot of ways personally, but that's just, that's just me. From a Buick 8 finally being made by the director of The Boy. Yeah, I don't know about that. And yet various others. And so, I mean, the confirmed projects are what still intrigue me, but the confirmed projects are the ones that are a little fewer and further between. I don't think James Wan is going to back out of doing Salem's Lot or the Tommy Knockers. He's producing both of those. He's not directing them. His Atomic something, I'm trying to remember. Anyway, so those, despite not having actual release dates confirmed yet, I'm fine with that, but really as of this point, the only stuff that we know is definitive is essentially Lisi's story, The Stand on CBS All Access, Lisi's being on Apple, and The Outsider. And just the point that I guess that I keep rounding around and trying to make is that I'm totally okay with the mainstream not being all over Stephen King's, I don't know, all over his shiz, man, It's really, it's been cool because of the fact that the opportunity to adapt stuff that I never thought would be made. I mean, they're working on The Jaunt, they're working on Rest Stop. I mean, small little things like that. That's supremely cool. But I don't know, there is something very personal about just keeping King ours that if, Dr. Sleep underperformed massively, and that's fine. We're still getting a 3-hour director's cut from Mike Flanagan, who was a passionate, constant reader. So if there's anything that may like be taking a step back, if the Kingaissance is like kind of, you know, coming to its close, it started in 2017, and it started, you know, with a thunderous just improvement of numbers here on this show, and not just Hail to Stephen King, but the horror show in general. We are forever indebted to, we are indebted so supremely to everything that went down in 2017 with the original Stephen King's It. We totally are. This program would have not caught the type of like fire, fuego, if not for that. And I mean, even beyond the horror show and the numbers that we saw from that initial It trailer reaction, the numbers that we saw in just rising subscribership in the year 2017 when, I mean, we had 1922, we had Gerald's Game, we had that Miss TV show that was very forgettable, but that I've grown to at least appreciate on another turn of the wheel, a different level of the tower. We also had, speaking of the tower, the Dark Tower movie that year, but really the behemoth, the big boy, the sleeping giant awaking after 27 years was obviously It. And we gained so many subscribers, we saw so many views, we saw so much growth on the channel in 2017, and that's what kicked off this resurgence. And so maybe in a lot of ways it would be befitting, at least is the point that I'm purporting, if it did kind of round out and come to a close here in the year of 19. Dr. Sleep is one of my favorite films of the year. I, in some ways, enjoyed It Chapter 2 more so than It Chapter 1 because of the fact that, I mean, it actually had the time jumping that is so essential to the storytelling in that massive, massive novel that I've read numerous times over the years. And so, is it a bad thing if the mainstream is finally like taking their clutches out as opposed to just cash grabbing? Yes and no. You know, yes, because of the fact that it's, you know, something that's personal can return to you. It's almost like, you know, I was punk rock before punk rock hit big in the mainstream in the 90s, and we had like all these pop punk, you know, whatever's like before Green Day, Dookie, and Offspring smash, you know, I was a punk guy. I like both those bands when they were on indies. It's that sort of thing. It's that, it's not even an elitist mentality. It's really like, it was mine before, like, it was presented to the masses and then everybody loved it. And granted, Stephen King has always been mainstream, but, you know, there's a difference between somebody who's like, I love The Shining, versus somebody who is like, dude, Dark Tower, Wizard and Glass is like, it made me cry, Charyu Tree. These are the differences, everybody. You know, this is a massive distinction. And so I'm not opposed to just that sort of scaling back as far as, you know, but, you know, scaling back unfortunately does mean that more noteworthy names are probably, I mean, more people like the director of The Boy working on adaptations and stuff as opposed to, you know, bigger names. And we all know King came out of the gate so just with so much strength initially. I mean, think about the fact that this was brought to my attention in the YOU the Ka-Tet, the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group. We genuinely had, for his first few adaptations, we had Brian De Palma, we had obviously Stanley Kubrick, we had Tobe Hooper, you know, for Salem's Lot, we had John Carpenter for Christine. I mean, it was like just firing on all cylinders with prolific horror names right off the bat. George Romero, you know, later with The Dark Half, which is another one that they're remaking, by the way. They're remaking The Dark Half too. So I just, you know, I know the quality waned for a number of years, and then once Flanagan and Muschietti came on the scene, and with their passion for King, I think that was one of the biggest things. And, you know, Muschietti and his sister Barbara, you know, that being Andy, they want to keep producing Stephen King stuff. It's just really as far as, you know, trying to actually direct more. That's not necessarily in the cards, especially if he's trying to do The Flash and all this other stuff. Flanagan, on the other hand, unless he gets a new Nightmare on Elm Street off the ground, which, while I'm curious to see his pitch, we have a great pitch here on the horror show that Cecil has written and is going to direct that we're still in pre-production for right now. So, you know, that's another thing. But between Flanagan and Muschietti and their passion for King, I think things are in good shape. And so, you know, but in the no to the question that I just, you know, put forward, you know, yes, it's nice to have things like back and more personal to us in that regard, as opposed to the, you know, casual and like fad fan, so to speak. In another regard, this sort of Renaissance, Kingaissance, as I've often called it, it is at least opened the doors for things to be adapted that you wouldn't necessarily expect, you know? I mean, I'd say Gerald's Game is definitely in that regard, but that's maybe more of a just representation of the passion of somebody like Mike Flanagan for, you know, Stephen King stuff, and just, you know, vision and belief and things of that nature. But we still don't have anything for Doomickey necessarily transpiring. We still don't have Insomnia happening, which I think would actually work very well as a Derry TV series. Where's the executive who's going to greenlight something like that, you know? I think it would do very, very well. You could do, like, Tales of Derry. You could do flashbacks in, you know, the It book, and then you could have, like, a modern story maybe that you jump up to, which is Insomnia. But, you know, that's just my brief little idea. Revival, I mean, Josh Boone has been trying to work on that since it came out. And we just had the 5-year anniversary, and he has his hands so steeped in the stand that I don't necessarily know. And there's really, as far as things go, you know, aside from short stories, novels that haven't been adapted, I mean, Rage and its controversy, you know, take that into consideration. The Regulators, shout out to, yes, our buddy Rob, Mr. Corder, but yeah, I don't necessarily see that happening, although as a TV series it might quite be kind of cool and so on, but I don't know. Bottom line, there is still so much that is being worked on, and we keep getting announcement after announcement, but I have a suspicion that those might start to cool down, especially with the fact that, you know, we don't have anything theatrically dated now as far as King stuff goes. You know, Tommyknockers, Salem's Lot, those being the two probably most prominent features that are being worked on at the moment. But yes, we just have some television series, you know, The Outsider next month, as I mentioned. And really, that's it. We don't know if there's a third season of Castle Rock. I would presume it'll transpire because of the fact that this second one was so much more celebrated than the previous. But there's a lot of plates up in the air, you know, there's a lot of stuff being twizzied and juggled and so on and so forth. And so that's why I will contend once more, is the Stephen Kingaissance concluding? If it is, I'm totally okay with it. You know, it opened up a lot of doors and it gave us a lot of incredibly cool content, but that doesn't mean that there still isn't a ton of other stuff that is coming. But what are your thoughts, everybody? I mean, more so than anything, I want the viewers of this and the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group just to chime in with their thoughts. And are you okay if King becomes a little less mainstream, as would be signaled by the fact that It Chapter 2 slightly underperformed, and then Dr. Sleep especially being the sequel to one of the most celebrated films of all time, you know, The Shining? It's an interesting time to be a Stephen King fan, you know. We still have If It Bleeds coming out in just a few months in May of next year. I'm all for more Holly, man. She is still one of my favorite creations of his in the entirety of the last decade. She's tremendous, and I love Hodges as well, obviously, you know, the trilogy in which she starred. But, I mean, there's a reason he keeps coming back to her. There's a reason she's in The Outsider. There's a reason she is getting her own, like, personalized tale in If It Bleeds, which is a 4-part novella, and they're all going to have some cohesion from what I understand, but yes, be their own separate thing to a degree. So I don't know. I'm personally okay if things become a little more just for us, the long-standing, the long dedicated constant readers, as opposed to, you know, once again, those who just are casual King fans and so on and so forth. And I think just the lack of success for Dr. Sleep was probably the biggest indication of that, you know, that the mainstream wasn't willing to give a chance to a continuation of a story, and in some ways a reimagining of a story. you know, a lot of people were probably like with The Shining doesn't need a sequel. The Shining was perfect, blah, blah, blah. I'm not one of those people who is just worshiping at the lap of Stanley Kubrick and his film. I think it's beautiful. I think the score is haunting. It just sacrificed so much in tone of the source material that in some ways I personally prefer the TV series, not on a production scale, okay, because it's very obviously a despondency in budget, but as far as a tone and an acting sense, I prefer, you know, the TV series as far as adapting the story. But then again, The Shining isn't one of my personal favorites anyway. I prefer Dr. Sleep. I prefer all the wackiness with the True Knot, and all of the performances in that film are fantastic. Ewan McGregor is tremendous and brings so much heart and warmth and vulnerability, you know, and just almost exactly what he needs to bring with Danny Torrance, which is a tortured, tragic sort of sense as well. And boy, does the ending of that come more in that tortured, tragic sense. So, I don't know. Has the Stephen Kingaissance concluded? That is the question that I put forth for all of you, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. It is supremely appreciated. I have been Jaime and Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube, but not just on The Horror Show. That's right, like, share, subscribe, make sure to, you know, do all of that stuff here with us, where we put up 1, sometimes 2 new episodes every single day. But I have my own YouTube channel where I have been covering all kinds of fun stuff, including massive Star Wars coverage over the course of the year. The prequels, a lot of the new novels that are coming out. I have upcoming coverage of the Clone Wars as we reach the 7th season of that. I've been doing each of the episodes of The Mandalorian. But yeah, you want to hear my thoughts on Rise of Skywalker? They're there. You can find them on just Jaime and Fuego, like you see below, youtube.com/Jaime and Fuego. And then lastly, every single Monday evening, although there might be some tick-ups during the holidays, obviously, and we apologize for that, but on the Will Discretia YouTube channel, I participate in a program called Show Business with Lindsay Mimsy, as I call him so affectionately. He has a YouTube channel called My 2 Cents of Nonsense, and then obviously CP being the showrunner and his YouTube channel. But yes, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Show Business is basically us breaking down box office numbers from the previous week, looking ahead and making some predictions to the one that is upcoming, and just having a little bit of palaver, so to speak, about the biggest entertainment news stories of the previous 7 days. So, I've been Fuego. Y'all have been amazing as always. Thank you for bearing with this sniffly baritone getting over the, you know, nastiness of the flu. And thank you for listening to my thoughts, and just, this was more so the extent of an editorial as opposed to a review or something of that nature. So thanks for letting me just, you know, wax intellectually about my adoration for Cy King, as you can tell with all of these books that I have read and so passionately and profoundly display. Shout out to the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group and everybody there. Reminder once more, the Talisman we will be discussing at the beginning of the year for its anniversary that just happened this past year, in the year of 19. So much in the year of 19. So very much. And it's been a pleasure for all of you to come along with it. Yeah, I guess until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, I shall say hasta luego, sin amigos, say thank you, constant readers and viewers alike. But I'm hopeful that we get to share more of this palaver sooner rather than later. And until that instance occurs, remember to stay scared and read Stephen King. Read something that's not been adapted. Read like Doomy, for God's sake. Come on.